Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. So in this video, I am just going to be going over all of the movies that I've picked up over the last few months. I haven't done a video for a while. I think the last time I did one was about the end of November, beginning of December. So I'll just show everything that I've picked up from December onwards. There's quite a lot to get through here, so yeah, let's just get straight into it. So the first Blu-ray that we have here is a TV show from the 90s. This is a show I've wanted to watch for a long time, and I finally watched it. I watched it over the last 2 months or so, and it is Babylon 5, the complete collection. So this is the collection of the 5 seasons of Babylon 5. And yeah, this is a sci-fi series from the mid to late 90s. It's basically about this space station by the name of Babylon 5. It's predominantly set there, and it's kind of like the setting... It's like this neutral point for all of the different alien races, and there's all sorts of different things going on throughout the 5 seasons. Really enjoyable show, interesting characters, good story. There's lots of great moments throughout the 5 seasons, and I think what's interesting about this show is that they had all 5 seasons planned out before they'd even started it, which I think is very unique, and they weren't making it up as they went along. They pretty much had the whole story in place right from the get-go, which is pretty cool. And yeah, really enjoyed it. If you like your sci-fi shows like Star Trek, you like sort of sci-fi from the 90s, definitely give it a go. So that is Babylon 5. Next up, we have a film that it's an upgrade, this one. The last time I owned this film was on VHS, never had it on DVD, and I got it mainly to add to my Arnold Schwarzenegger Blu-ray collection. So it is The Sixth Day. So yeah, this is one of Arnie's later films. I think it came out about the year 2000. He plays this guy who is replaced with a clone, and he ends up having to go on the run and find out what's going on, why he's been cloned, and there's all this this big conspiracy and things like that. It's not one of the greatest Arnie films, if I'm being honest. It's quite cheesy. It feels like it's aged quite a lot, even though it only came out about 25 years ago. So yeah, it's not amazing, but it does have one of my favourite Arnie quotes. It's when he confronts the main villain, and he basically says to the main villain that he should clone himself so that he can fuck himself. And I just love that quote. It's just typical Arnie. But yeah, other than that, it's not amazing, but I just got it to add to my Arnold Schwarzenegger collection. So yeah, that is The Sixth Day. Next up, we have another upgrade here. This is a 4K. This is an upgrade straight from my old DVD of this movie, and it is Air Force One, starring Harrison Ford. And yeah, this is, of course, the action thriller from the 90s where Harrison Ford plays the President of the United States, and he's returning to America after a trip to Russia, and the plane gets overtaken by Russian terrorists, with the main terrorist being played by Gary Oldman. Yeah, I've always enjoyed this film. On a rewatch, it didn't quite hold up for me as much as I remembered. It's probably not one of my favourite Harrison Ford films, but it's still got a lot of good moments. Gary Oldman plays a great villain. It's got some good tension in there. But yeah, it's not my favourite Harrison Ford film, but overall it is pretty decent. And yeah, it's a very good 4K transfer. So yeah, definitely pick it up if you do like the movie. So yeah, that is Air Force One. Right, this next movie was a blind buy for use of a better term, and it is for the movie Blind Fury, starring Rutger Hauer. So yeah, I'd never seen this film before, but I'd always heard interesting things about it. Rutger Hauer plays this soldier who goes missing in action. He loses his sight, and whilst he's missing, he ends up becoming this master swordsman. And when the movie begins, he sort of returns to America after being away for such a long time, and he ends up having to protect this young boy who is being used as leverage for the boy's father by these villains who want to use the father because he's like a chemist or something, and it's to do with like drugs and things like that. Yeah, it's a fun movie. It's very daft. It's very silly as you might expect, but it's a lot of fun, and it has some real enjoyable action scenes, and yeah, it's just very light-hearted and fun. So yeah, that is Blind Fury. Right, so next up we have a Charles Bronson film. Now, just to warn you, this is the first of quite a few Charles Bronson movies that I picked up. But we have Breakheart Pass. So this is kind of like a Western film from 1975. Charles Bronson plays this, well, he's supposedly a fugitive on the run, and he ends up getting captured and gets put aboard this train that has like law enforcement and government officials on it. And whilst the train is en route to its destination, people start to mysteriously die one by one, and Charles Bronson's character gets free and decides to investigate and figure out what's going on. Yeah, it's quite a good film. This I really enjoyed it. It kind of starts off like a bit of like an Agatha Christie murder mystery, but it all kind of leads to like this great action-packed finale. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Probably one of the better Charles Bronson films that I've seen. So if you like Charles Bronson or if you like westerns, definitely give Breakheart Pass a go. Next up, we have a 4K release of a movie that I thought this had actually gone out of print like a while back, or at least this version. But I saw it in HMV on the shelf, and I decided to give it a go because I know a lot of people really like this film. And it is Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker. So this is kind of like a slasher from the early 1980s. I think it was part of the video nasty sort of craze. It's basically about this young boy who he lives with his aunt. His parents are deceased, and his auntie is this very dominating, possessive woman, and she'll basically stop at nothing to keep her son, if you like, with her all the time, and it kind of leads to like sort of murderous consequences. I thought the film was okay. It wasn't amazing. It's not one of the best sort of video nasties or slashers that I've seen from the early 80s, but it was pretty decent, and it's a nice release from Severin. I think this is my first ever Severin release. But yeah, it was a pretty decent slasher slash horror film. So yeah, that is Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker. Next up, we have another upgrade. Again, the last time I owned this film was on VHS back in the day, and it is Chicken Run. So yeah, this is a German import of the movie. And yeah, this was a film I loved as a kid. It's basically about this chicken farm, and it's about the chickens wanting to escape from the farm, and it takes a lot of influence from The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen. I've got to admit, I haven't seen this movie in years, and it didn't really hold up for me as much as I remember. Like I said, I used to love it as a kid, but I just felt like it was going through the motions a little bit on a rewatch. I certainly don't hold it up to the same regard as, say, the Wallace and Gromit films, who, done by the same creators. But yeah, it's still fun. It's just not as good as I remember. But yeah, I'm glad to have it on Blu-ray nonetheless. So yeah, that is Chicken Run. Next up, we have a movie starring Chuck Norris. And again, you're going to see a lot of Chuck Norris movies in this pickups video. But the first one we have here is one that, again, it's an upgrade from my old DVD, and it's the movie Code of Silence. Now, I first saw this film when I was, well, it was probably about 10 years ago, and I didn't like it. I didn't really care for it. But on a rewatch, I just thought this was great. Like I said, it stars Chuck Norris, and he plays this Chicago police officer. And there's a few different things going on in this film. The sort of the main plot is about these like rival drug gangs that the police are trying to take down, but there's also this sort of cover-up and corruption going on within the police force that he sort of goes up against. And yeah, it's just a really good police thriller, like a genuinely compelling police movie. And Chuck Norris is pretty great in it. There's lots of great action in it, some great fight scenes in it. And overall, it's just a really enjoyable police thriller from the 80s. And I don't know why I didn't like it the first time I did, but I'm glad to have given it a rewatch because, yeah, it's just a great film. So yeah, that is Code of Silence. Next up, we have a brand new release from Arrow Video, and it is Cruising on 4K. So yeah, this is Cruising starring Al Pacino, directed by William Friedkin. This movie sees Al Pacino playing this police detective who he has to go undercover because there's a serial killer on the loose in New York, and he's targeting men in the gay community at like the nightclubs. So Al Pacino has to go undercover and kind of infiltrate that community to apprehend the killer. And yeah, I've always been a big supporter of this film. I know it's quite controversial. I know it was quite controversial when it came out, but I really enjoy this one. It's got a dark, gritty kind of feel to it. You get that sort of seedy New York vibe from it, and I just really enjoy it. And I've always really liked the ending as well. I know a lot of people don't like the ending because of the ambiguity, but it really works for me. And yeah, I just really like this film, and glad to have it on 4K from Arrow Video. So that is Cruising. Next up, we have an action movie starring Dolph Lundgren. Dolph Lundgren is an actor that I've been trying to get more into his films as well. You know, I know him from Rocky IV and The Expendables, Masters of the Universe, but I know he's got a whole bunch of other films that I've been wanting to check out. So again, you will see a few Dolph Lundgren films on this list, but the first one we have here is Dark Angel. And the best way to describe this film is it's Dolph Lundgren fighting against drug dealing aliens. That's pretty much the synopsis of the movie. But my God, is it fun! Just a good, solid 90-minute action movie. It's got some good action in there, some good fight scenes. It's a silly plot, I know, but if you like your sort of old school action films of the ilk of like Cannon and companies like that, then you'll probably have a lot of fun with this one. I certainly did. So that is Dark Angel. Next up, we have Delta Force 2 starring Chuck Norris. So yeah, again, the first Delta Force movie, I own that one. I've got the Arrow Blu-ray of that one. And again, that was a film that I watched it for the first time about 10 years ago and I didn't like it. But I gave it a rewatch and I had such a blast with it. It's just such a great action film from the 80s. So it made me want to check out Delta Force 2. And whilst it isn't as good, it's still a really enjoyable action movie. It's got plenty of action, plenty of good fight scenes. It may just be a sequel in name only, but it's still a lot of fun. And it's got a good villainous performance from Billy Drago. He was always great at playing a villain. He's probably best known for being in The Untouchables. But yeah, he's really good in this one, and as is Chuck Norris. So yeah, that is Delta Force 2. Next up, we have another new release from Arrow Video, and it is Demolition Man on 4K. Yeah, this one sees Sylvester Stallone playing the cop, Wesley Snipes playing the criminal. They're both frozen in this high-tech prison at the beginning of the movie, and then years later in the future, Wesley Snipes is unfrozen, and he goes on this big crime spree. They end up having to unfreeze Sylvester Stallone's character to go after him. And yeah, this is just a classic sort of action film from the early 90s. I always remember enjoying this one a lot as a kid. I will say it's not my favourite Stallone film. I've always thought the first half of this film is better than the second half. It kind of veers off in some strange directions in the second half, but I still enjoy it nonetheless. Wesley Snipes is absolutely on fire in this film. He's a great villain. He's just very, very funny and also quite menacing at the same time. And it's a very nice release from Arrow Video. So yeah, that is Demolition Man. Next up, we have another new release from Arrow Video. This one arrived ridiculously early. I actually don't even think it's out until, I think today is the release day of it, but I got it like late January. And it is Dressed to Kill, directed by Brian De Palma. Yeah, this is a film it's basically about this woman who is murdered at the beginning of the movie, and the murder is witnessed by this prostitute slash call girl played by Nancy Allen, and she kind of ends up fearing for her life as this killer is on the loose and after her. Yeah, I've always really liked this film. I would say of Brian De Palma's early films, this is definitely one of my favourites from him. I think he started off doing a lot of thrillers of this ilk. You know, you've got Dressed to Kill, you've got Carrie, you've got what's the other one? Blowout. You've got a lot of those types of films, but this was always the one that I enjoyed the most. And yeah, it still really holds up for me. And yeah, it's just a good, solid early 80s serial killer thriller. So yeah, that is Dressed to Kill. I picked this next one up in the 88 Films sale that they had a few weeks back. Again, this is an upgrade from my old DVD, and it is D-Tox, starring Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone plays this cop who's on the trail of this serial killer. And at the beginning of the movie, the serial killer murders his wife. And as you can imagine, Stallone's character, he spirals out of control, goes into depression and, you know, suicidal and all that kind of stuff. And he ends up getting sent to this clinic, which is, I think it's in Alaska, or it's in like this snowy region of America, very isolated. And it's like a clinic where all these other cops go for like rehabilitation. But the serial killer ends up following his character there, and a killing spree starts. I've always thought this film was a bit like a serial killer version of The Thing. There's a lot of paranoia in it. You don't know who the killer is. And I've always really enjoyed this one. I think it's very underrated. It definitely does have its issues. It goes a bit too far maybe in the last act, but I've always enjoyed this one. And it's got some interesting interviews on it. The director of the film talks a lot about the issues he had making it and all that kind of stuff. So there's some really interesting special features on this release. And overall, I just think it's a good, solid film from with Sylvester Stallone that he made later in his career. So yeah, that is D-Tox. Next up, we have another film that, again, was a upgrade from when I had this film on VHS back in the day. And it is End of Days, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This one sees Arnie playing this cop in New York, and it's set during the days leading up to the millennium, because this came out in 1999. And his character has to protect this girl who's basically been chosen by Satan to be the mother of his child. And they have to conceive the child before the millennium, and it'll bring about the end of the world and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, again, this is a film that I've always really liked. I think out of Arnie's later films, I think it's probably one of his best and most underrated. It's definitely got its problems. It's a bit silly in places, but if you can get on board with the plot and just enjoy it for what it is, I think it's a great film. It's very dark in places, quite grisly, quite violent, but it's just got a lot of great moments, and I really enjoy it. And I always like it watching this one sort of around about the end of the year, just because obviously the setting and it has that kind of vibe. But yeah, I think it's a good solid film. So that is End of Days. Next up, we have another film starring Charles Bronson, and we have The Evil That Men Do. So yeah, I think this is a Spanish import of the film. Charles Bronson plays this former assassin who is hired to assassinate this guy known as the Doctor, who is down in South America, and he's basically performing these like experiments, and he's torturing like sort of innocent civilians and journalists, and I think he's doing it sort of for like political gain. And yeah, Charles Bronson is just down there to assassinate him. It's quite a violent film in places. There's definitely some uncomfortable moments with the torture, but it leads to a pretty good conclusion. Charles Bronson is good in it. It feels like this could easily be a Death Wish film, but it isn't. But yeah, still a really enjoyable thriller, and one to check out if you like Charles Bronson. So that is The Evil That Men Do. Next up, we have a 4K release from Scream Factory, and we have The Faculty. Yeah, this is a horror film from the late 90s, I think from 1998, and the best way to describe this film is its invasion of the body snatchers in a high school. And yeah, I absolutely love this film. I remember seeing it on TV. I think it was like on ITV or Channel 4 back when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I've just always had a good time with it. Just a really fun, easy to watch horror film from the late 90s. Got a great cast in there. You've got Elijah Wood, you've got Josh Hartnett, you've got Robert Patrick in there, amongst a whole load of other great actors. And yeah, just such an enjoyable horror movie. It's not the most original in terms of plot, but it's still a lot of fun. That is The Faculty. Next up, we have another Chuck Norris film. This one is Firewalker. So this one stars Chuck Norris and Lou Gossett Jr. And they play these these archaeological adventurers, but they're just complete failures. They never ever get any treasure on any of their excursions, and yeah, they're just kind of bumbling idiots basically, but they think they're amazing. And at the beginning of the movie, they're hired by this woman played by Melody Anderson to search for this treasure with her, and they decide to to go along. And yeah, I thought this film was pretty good. It's more of a comedic turn for Chuck Norris, and I know a lot of people don't think he really pulls it off all that well, but I think he's okay in it. I thought the two of them, the two actors, worked well together. It's more of a light-hearted, family-friendly kind of film, but overall I enjoyed it. It's never boring. It's a bit silly, a bit cheesy in places, but it's pretty fun and easy to watch. So yeah, that is Firewalker. Next up, we have a 4K release from 88 Films. Now, this is a movie that I'd seen before, and the first time I watched this film, I absolutely hated it. I don't know what it was. I just didn't like it. But I will say that I had come home from a night out, so I'd had a few drinks, so it probably wasn't in the best state to watch a movie like this. But I'm so glad I picked this up because it was so much better on a rewatch. And it is From Beyond, directed by Stuart Gordon. So this one stars Jeffrey Combs and Ken Foree from Dawn of the Dead. And it's basically about this scientist who's created this machine, and when the machine is activated, it opens this portal where all of these creatures come out and start wreaking havoc. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It's pretty crazy. There's some wild stuff in this movie. And yeah, the first time I watched it, I just did not get on board with it, but I always wanted to check it out again. And I'm so glad I did, because I had so much more fun on a rewatch. And it is a lovely release from 88 Films. Yeah, there's just some great artwork on it, and loads of special features, and the sort of the postcards and the poster all in there. So yeah, really nice release, and yeah, a great film on a rewatch. So that is From Beyond. Next up, we have another recent release from Arrow Video, and we have The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Yeah, this is a Korean film that came out in 2008, and as you can imagine from the title, it is basically Korea's version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, it's a fantastic Korean Western. I remember seeing this one a few years back and having a great time with it. So I was always going to get this this box set from Arrow Video, and yeah, it's just such a fun movie. It's basically three characters, the good, the bad, and the weird, and they discover this treasure map and decide to go looking for the treasure, and obviously the three of them are at odds with each other. And it's just a fun movie, got plenty of action in it, shot really well, and yeah, it's just a beautiful film and so much fun. So yeah, that is The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Next up, we have another one from Arrow Video, and it is The Great Escape on 4K. Yeah, classic war film from the 1960s, starring Steve McQueen and a whole host of other great actors. If you're not familiar with the story, it's basically about these prisoners of war who are in this like prison camp, and they make this plan to escape from the prison. And yeah, it's just such a fantastic film. I think the last act in particular, where they all escape and they all kind of go in different directions, there's some great stuff in there, some great tense moments. And yeah, I've always loved this film. I remember seeing this one a lot when I was a kid, especially on Christmas Day. I think for some reason here in the UK, it's kind of like an unofficial Christmas movie, and it always plays on Christmas Day without fail. And it also comes with the sequel slash remake, The Great Escape 2, starring Christopher Reeve. I'd never seen it before. I thought it was pretty decent. It's not a patch on the first one, of course, but it's a good, solid TV movie. So yeah, that is The Great Escape on 4K. Next up, we have another release from Arrow Video, and we have Inglourious Basterds on 4K. Yeah, Quentin Tarantino's epic World War II movie about this group of soldiers called the Bastards, who they're basically like soldiers who have gone AWOL, and they've just waged their own war on the Nazis. And there's all sorts of different things going on in this film, but I love this film. I think this film is very underrated. I remember when it came out, it was very big, but I kind of feel like in the last few years, it's kind of one of Tarantino's more forgotten films. I feel like people talk more about Django Unchained and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But I would say after Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, this is my favourite from him. Yeah, just a great film, and it's just got some fantastic moments. The opening sequence is great. The scene in the tavern is equally great, but yeah, the whole movie is just fantastic, and yeah, I just love it. So that is Inglourious Basterds. Next up, we have a movie released by Vinegar Syndrome, another Chuck Norris movie here, and we have Invasion USA. Yeah, I'd never seen this movie before, so it was a first time watch, but I know it's considered one of Chuck Norris's best films by a lot of his fans. It wasn't my favourite, if I'm being honest, but I still really enjoyed it. A good, enjoyable action movie from the 1980s. It kind of feels like a bigger version of Red Dawn, where these like Russian soldiers come into America and try and take over, and people like Chuck Norris have to fight back against them. So it's a pretty crazy film. There's lots of action in it, crazy plots, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, not my personal favourite Chuck Norris movie, but still really enjoyed it. That is Invasion USA. Next up, we have another new release from Arrow Video, 4K release of the movie Lifeforce, directed by Tobe Hooper. So yeah, this is another film that I remember seeing for the first time about 10 years ago and not really liking it. But I always wanted to rewatch it, and I thought I'd just get the 4K of it. And yeah, I did enjoy it a little bit more. I still think it has some issues, but overall, it's pretty fun. Basically, space vampires come to Earth and start to take over. I can't really say much more than that. It's pretty fun. It does have some issues. It's not necessarily my favourite Tobe Hooper film, but it's pretty fun nonetheless. So that is Lifeforce. Next up, we have another film starring Chuck Norris, and this is another film that I'd always heard was one of his best, and it is Lone Wolf McQuade. And yeah, this film was great. Just a fantastic action movie from the early 80s. Chuck Norris basically plays this Texas Ranger who ends up having to face off against this drug lord played by David Carradine. And yeah, it's pretty simple stuff in terms of plot, but there is some great action in this, and ends with this fantastic fight scene at the end between the two actors. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I can't believe I'd never seen it before, because it's up there with the great action movies from the 80s. So yeah, that is Lone Wolf McQuade. Next up, we have a Blu-ray release of one of my favourite films from last year, and it is Longlegs. Yeah, this is like a horror/thriller about this FBI agent who is trying to track down this killer, played by Nicolas Cage, who sort of goes by the name of Longlegs. Yeah, I think this film is fantastic. I know it's not for everyone. It's a bit more slower paced, but this film for me, it's one of those films that it's more about unsettling you and getting under your skin, which is what I really like with horror films. It doesn't have to be like in your face, the horror. It can be sort of a bit more subtle, and that's what I really like about this film. And yeah, I was always going to get this one when it came out. So yeah, that is Longlegs. Next up, we have a new release from 88 Films, and it is Masters of the Universe, starring Dolph Lundgren, of course, based on the classic sort of cartoon He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Yeah, this was a film that I never really used to like. I don't really have the nostalgia for it. I only really saw it for the first time about 15 years ago, and I never really cared for it. But I always wanted to give it a rewatch, and I've been waiting for a nice release of it to come out, and now we have one. And yeah, I enjoyed it on a rewatch. I think considering what Canon had to work with the budgets they had, I think this film turns out, well, it comes out pretty well, in my opinion. Yes, it is flawed. It's got some issues, but I still really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. Just switch your brain off and enjoy it. So yeah, that is Masters of the Universe. Next up, we have another Charles Bronson movie, and we have The Mechanic. Yeah, again, this was a film I'd never seen before, but I'd always heard pretty good things about it. Charles Bronson plays this hitman who he kind of works by his own rules. He works alone, but as age starts to catch up with him, he decides to take on this young man as his protege, and he teaches him everything he knows. But as the film goes on, the sort of the two of them start to become at odds with each other, and it leads to a pretty good finale. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not my favourite Charles Bronson film that I've ever seen, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So yeah, that is The Mechanic. Next up, we have a film starring Dolph Lundgren, and this is a film I'd actually never heard of before, but having a look at the reviews, they were pretty positive, so I thought I'd give it a go. So it is Men of War. Dolph Lundgren plays this soldier, and he's hired by these people to take these soldiers to this tropical island, and they're going there basically to liberate the island because there's something there that these people who've hired them want. But when they get to the island, they find that there's this tribe there, and the group of soldiers end up becoming split in what to do, with Dolph Lundgren and a few others siding with the tribe, whereas the other soldiers don't really care about the tribe and they just want to get them out the way so they can complete their mission. So it ends up with the two groups of soldiers going at it, and it leads to like a bloody and violent conclusion. And yeah, it's a really enjoyable film. Some good action scenes in there, pretty good performance from Dolph Lundgren. And yeah, overall, it's a very underrated movie and I enjoyed it. So yeah, that is Men at War. More Chuck Norris films now, and I'll show these two together. But we have Missing in Action 2, and we have Braddock Missing in Action 3. Yeah, I'd seen the first Missing in Action film before, and again, it was one of those films I never liked, but after giving it a rewatch, I enjoyed it so much more, and so much so that I wanted to check out the other two. The second film is technically the first film, because it's actually a prequel, and I think it was originally supposed to be the first one to get released, but they decided to release the other Missing in Action film instead because they considered it the better film. And then Braddock Missing in Action 3 takes place a few years later, and it's him going back to Vietnam to rescue his wife and child that he didn't know he had. But yeah, I just really enjoy these films. Like I said, the first one I never liked, but on a rewatch I really did enjoy it a lot more, and it's still the best one, but the second and third one are still really enjoyable, and just great action scenes, great fight scenes. Chuck Norris is being Chuck Norris, so yeah, overall it's a very solid trilogy of action movies. So yeah, that is Missing in Action 2 and 3. Next up, we have another movie starring Charles Bronson, and we have Mr. Majestyk, and this was a cracking film, this. I don't want to say too much about the plot because there's a lot of twists and turns in it, but he basically plays this melon farmer, and he ends up going to war against this mob boss who wants to take revenge on Charles Bronson's character for reasons that I won't say, because there's just so much happening in this movie. But yeah, it's just such great fun. Charles Bronson's on great form, and there's just a lot of fun moments in it. And yeah, overall, it's just a cracking little thriller from the 1970s. So yeah, that is Mr. Majestyk. Next up, we have the Muppets Blu-ray collections. This is a collection of 6 of the Muppets films. And the reason I got this is because I don't actually own that many. Well, I didn't own that many Muppets films on physical media. I'd seen most of them, but I just never owned them. And this one contains the original Muppets film. It contains The Great Muppet Caper, Christmas Carol, Treasure Island, and the 2 recent ones, the one with Jason Segel and the other one with Ricky Gervais. I'd never seen those 2 films before, and that's mainly why I got this, but I do enjoy the others. The original Muppets film is one of my all-time favourites. I remember watching that a lot as a kid. The Great Muppet Caper, not as big a fan of that one, but then you have Christmas Carol and Treasure Island, which are just 2 of my favourites. And yeah, just a lot of great childhood memories from watching a lot of these films. So yeah, that is the Muppets Collection on Blu-ray. Next up, we have another one from Charles Bronson, this one from 88 Films, and it is Murphy's Law. This one came out a bit later in Charles Bronson's career, and he basically plays this guy who is framed for murder, and he ends up having to go on the run, and he's tagged along by this female character who is basically like a petty thief, and they end up teaming up together to find out who's committing the real murders. Yeah, I enjoyed this one. The only thing I will say about this movie is that this character, this female character, is probably one of the most annoying, insufferable characters I have ever seen in a movie. Everything she says is just terrible. She spends most of the movie insulting people, and her insults are just ridiculous. She sounds like a 12-year-old boy whenever she insults anyone in the movie. But that aside, it is still pretty fun. Charles Bronson, it feels like he's a bit more... It feels like he's having a bit more fun in this movie. He's less stoic. He's less cold-blooded. He feels like he's got more of a humorous side in this film, so that was kind of refreshing to see. But yeah, overall, it's a fun movie. That is Murphy's Law. Next up, we have a martial arts movie from the 1970s starring Jimmy Wang Yu, and it is The One-Armed Boxer. Yeah, this is a movie I've been trying to track down for a long time, and I finally have, as you can see. Yeah, this is a fantastic film. Great martial arts movie. Jimmy Wang Yu plays this guy who he basically gets at odds with this gang, and during a fight, his arm is severed during the fight, and and he ends up having to train and learn to train with just the one arm, and then he ends up coming back for revenge against the gang, and just, he just has the one arm to fight with. But this is a fantastic film, very action-packed, relentless. It's very rarely boring. There's just fight scene after fight scene after fight scene, and just so much fun. So yeah, a great martial arts movie from the 1970s. That is One-Armed Boxer. Next up, we have Signs, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, and this is the 4K release. Yeah, this is a movie that I love this film. I think besides The Sixth Sense, this is my favourite M. Night Shyamalan film. I think it's very, very underrated, very misunderstood. I think a lot of people go into this one expecting like an alien invasion, War of the Worlds type of film, but I see it more as like a family drama. With that sort of being the main plot, and the alien invasion is kind of secondary. And yeah, I just think for that reason I really love it. I think there's a lot of deeper themes in this film, deeper meanings. The acting is incredible from the cast, like Mel Gibson, Joaquin Phoenix. But you've also got a very young Abigail Breslin in there. I think she was about 5 or 6 when she made this film, and she's probably the best like 5 or 6-year-old actress I've ever seen in a film. But yeah, just a fantastic movie, and really glad to have it on 4K. So yeah, that is Signs. Next up, we have Silent Trigger, starring Dolph Lundgren, and it's directed by Russell Mulcahy, who is probably best known for directing Highlander. And yeah, this was a great film. Dolph Lundgren plays this former special ops soldier who is now an assassin, and he's tasked with going to this high-rise building as a sniper, and to basically just await his target. But he finds himself at odds with some of the people who are in this building, and it kind of just escalates from there. But I really enjoyed this one. It pretty much takes place in this building for the whole movie. It's got a sort of a experimental kind of vibe to it. It's not like an out-and-out action film, but it still does have, some decent action films nonetheless. But yeah, it's a bit of a different film for Dolph Lundgren, but I still really enjoyed it. So yeah, that is Silent Trigger. Next up, we have Silent Rage, again starring Chuck Norris, and this is the 88 films release of the movie. Yeah, this film is about this serial killer that has been genetically engineered, so he's virtually indestructible. And Chuck Norris plays the sheriff of the small town who has to stop him. And yeah, I thought this was pretty good. It's almost a bit like a slasher movie, but it probably never really comes up in conversation when people talk about slashers from the early 80s. A lot of people describe this one as Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers, and yeah, it is kind of like that a little bit. It's not my favourite Chuck Norris film. I'd have it a bit lower than some of his other ones, but it's still a lot of fun. I really like the opening sequence of this one in particular. It's like it's one of these long unedited sequences where the killer kills someone in a house, and yeah, it's just a great moment. But yeah, overall, it's a solid sort of slasher / horror movie from the early 80s starring Chuck Norris. So yeah, that is Silent Rage. Next up, we have The Sixth Sense on 4K. So yeah, I picked this one up along with Signs. Like I said earlier, this film and Signs are my two favourite films from M. Night Shyamalan. And yeah, this is just a classic film for me from 1999. Again, some people consider it a horror movie. I consider it more of a drama with horror undertones. But yeah, it's just got a great atmosphere, great acting in it again. And no matter how many times I watch this movie, the ending always gets me. Not necessarily the twist, but it's just such an emotional ending. And yeah, it's just fantastic stuff. And it's just a great movie. So yeah, that is The Sixth Sense on 4K. Next up, we have another movie that I saw in the cinema last year, and I just had a blast when I saw this film in the cinema. It was just great fun, and I couldn't wait to watch it again at home. And it is Smile 2. So yeah, this is the sequel to the first Smile movie that came out only about a couple of years ago. But this movie for me was everything about the first one, but just so much better. I like the protagonist more in this film. It just kind of ups the horror aspects in all the right ways. And it's just a relentless thrill ride from start to finish. And I don't know what it is about people standing there doing creepy smiles, but there's just something really unsettling about it. But yeah, it's just a fun movie from start to finish. And Naomi Scott is fantastic in this film. Her acting is unbelievable. And, you know, I could see her becoming like a future Scream Queen if that's the route she wants to take. But yeah, just a great sequel and much better than the first Smile film, in my opinion. So yeah, that is Smile 2. And then the last release that I have to show you here is another one from Arrow Video, and it is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 on 4K. So yeah, this was the long-awaited sequel at the time to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This one produced by Cannon Films, stars Dennis Hopper. Now, I know a lot of people seem to have very mixed opinions about this film. I know that some people don't like it because it's a bit too different and a bit too over the top. But for me, I've always really liked this film, and I like the fact that it does something different. I don't really see the point in trying to just repeat the same movie and trying to just do the original film again. I like that this one goes in a very, very different direction. It's very comedic in places, but it still has the horror and the gore that we kind of expect. I mean, I suppose the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't have like gore on screen, but it's still, you know, very violent in the way it does it. But yeah, I just think this film is so much fun. And depending on how I feel, I sometimes like this one more than the original, which might be a bit of a bold statement, but there you go. But yeah, I love this movie. Just a fun sequel, and yeah, a great release from Arrow Video. So yeah, that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So there you go, guys. Those are all of the movies that I've picked up over the last 2 or 3 months. Really hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen any of these movies, if you've picked up any of these titles, what do you think of them? Do you agree with my opinions on them? Do you not agree? I would love to hear your thoughts. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you all again on the next one. So take care.